Chidimma stood before the council once more, her heart still racing from the recent trial in the sacred forest. She had conquered her deepest fears, but now she faced a different challenge, the trial of the mind. This trial would test her knowledge of the village's history, her understanding of the people's values, and her ability to think critically under pressure. Elder Ikin addressed the gathered crowd, his voice clear and commanding. The trial of the mind is a test of wisdom and knowledge. Chidimma, you must solve the riddle of the ancestors. This riddle has been passed down through generations, and it represents the core of our beliefs and traditions. If you solve it, you will have proven your deep connection to our culture and your worthiness to lead. Chidimma took a deep breath, her mind already racing. She had spent much of her childhood learning the stories and customs of her people, but she knew that this riddle would not be easy. The elders were known for their cleverness, and the riddle would likely be a complex one. Elder Chinya stepped forward, her expression stern but fair. She held a carved wooden box in her hands, and as she opened it, the crowd leaned in to see what was inside. Chinya carefully removed an ancient scroll, the edges frayed with age. She unrolled the scroll and began to read. Here is the riddle of the ancestors. I am not alive, but I grow. I do not have lungs, but I need air. I do not have a mouth, but water kills me. What am I? Solve this riddle, Chidimma, and you will pass the trial of the mind. Chidimma listened intently, repeating the riddle in her mind. I am not alive, but I grow. I do not have lungs, but I need air. I do not have a mouth, but water kills me. The riddle was cryptic, and the answer wasn't immediately clear. The crowd watched in silence as Chidimma pondered the riddle, her brow furrowed in concentration. She knew she needed to think carefully and not rush her answer. The words played over and over in her mind, each phrase offering a clue. I am not alive, but I grow, Chidimma whispered to herself. What could grow without being alive? She thought of plants, but they were alive. Then she considered the second line, I do not have lungs, but I need air. This line ruled out anything that was truly alive. Finally, the third line, I do not have a mouth, but water kills me. Suddenly, the answer came to her like a spark of lightning. Fire, she said aloud, her eyes bright with realization. The answer is fire. The murmur ran through the crowd, and the elders exchanged glances. Chinya smiled for the first time since the trials began. Correct, Chidimma. The answer is indeed fire. You have passed the trial of the mind. A wave of relief washed over Chidimma, and she felt a surge of pride. She had solved the riddle, proving her wisdom and understanding of the ways of her people. The crowd erupted in applause, and for the first time since her arrival in Arachuku, Chidimma felt truly accepted by the villagers. But the trials were not yet over. Elder Ikin raised his hand, signaling for silence. Chidimma has proven her courage and her wisdom, but there is one final trial she must face, the trial of the spirit. This trial will test her connection to the spirits of her ancestors and her ability to commune with them. Only by passing this final trial can she complete the rite of truth. Chidimma felt a shiver run down her spine. The trial of the spirit was the most mysterious and challenging of all. It required not just strength or intelligence, but a deep spiritual connection, a connection that Chidimma was unsure she possessed. The villagers watched with bated breath as Elder Ikin led Chidimma to the edge of the village, where an ancient shrine stood. The shrine was a sacred place, believed to be where the spirits of the ancestors could be contacted. The air around the shrine was thick with the scent of burning incense, and the ground was covered in symbols etched into the earth by generations of spiritual leaders. Chidimma knelt before the shrine, her heart pounding in her chest. She closed her eyes and tried to calm her racing thoughts. She knew that she needed to clear her mind and open herself to the spirits if she was to succeed in this trial. Elder Ikin spoke softly, his voice guiding her. Chidimma, you must open your heart and mind to the spirits. Let them guide you. Ask them for their wisdom and their blessing. CHIDIMMA took a deep breath and focused on the rhythm of her breathing. Slowly, she felt the world around her fade away, the sounds of the village, the smell of the incense, the weight of the trials she had already faced. All that remained was the stillness within her. Time seemed to stretch on, and CHIDIMMA began to feel a presence, a warm, comforting presence that seemed to envelop her. She could not see it, but she could feel it, like a gentle hand resting on her shoulder. In her mind's eye, she saw a figure standing before her. It was a woman, her features indistinct but familiar. CHIDIMMA knew instinctively that this was an ancestor, a guardian of her people's history and wisdom. CHIDIMMA, the figure said, her voice soft and kind, you have faced many challenges, and you have shown great courage and wisdom. But the path ahead is still uncertain. You must continue to trust in yourself and in the strength of your ancestors. We are with you, always. Tears welled up in CHIDIMMA's eyes as she listened to the words of the spirit. She felt a deep sense of connection to her people, to her ancestors, and to the land that had shaped her. Thank you, CHIDIMMA whispered, her voice choked with emotion. I will not forget your words. The presence slowly faded, leaving CHIDIMMA with a profound sense of peace. She opened her eyes and saw the elders standing before her, their faces filled with respect and admiration. The spirits have spoken, Elder Ikin said, his voice filled with reverence. CHIDIMMA, you have passed the trial of the spirit. You have completed the rite of truth. The villagers erupted in cheers, their voices filled with joy and relief. CHIDIMMA stood, feeling lighter than she had in days. The trials were over, and she had proven herself to be a true daughter of her people. As the villagers gathered around her, offering their congratulations and pledging their loyalty, CHIDIMMA knew that the road ahead would still be difficult. The king was still a threat, and the fight for the village's freedom was far from over. But now, she knew that she was not alone. She had the support of her people, the wisdom of her ancestors, and the strength within herself to face whatever challenges lay ahead. With the rite of truth complete, CHIDIMMA found herself embraced by the people of Arachukwu in a way she had never experienced before. The villagers, once wary of her mixed heritage and the scandal surrounding her mother, now looked upon her with newfound respect and admiration. They saw in her not just a young woman, but a leader who had proven her courage, wisdom, and connection to their shared history and traditions. But even as she basked in this acceptance, CHIDIMMA knew that her journey was far from over. The trials had been only the beginning. The king's threat still loomed large, and the unity of the villages was more fragile than ever. There were whispers of war, of betrayal, and of powers beyond their understanding that might be at play. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the village was bathed in the soft glow of twilight, CHIDIMMA sat with Nkem by the river. The water flowed gently, reflecting the pinks and oranges of the sky, and the air was filled with the sounds of birds settling down for the night. Nkem had been quiet since the end of the rite, watching CHIDIMMA with a mixture of pride and concern. Now, as they sat together, he finally spoke. You've done something incredible, CHIDIMMA, he said, his voice soft but earnest. You've earned the trust of the people, and you've shown them that you're more than capable of leading. But I can't help but worry about what comes next. The king won't take this lightly. He'll see you as a threat. CHIDIMMA nodded, her expression thoughtful. I know, Nkem. I've been thinking about it too. The king is powerful, and he's not the kind of man to back down easily. But I believe that if we stand together, the villages can resist him. We have to find a way to unite everyone, Arachukwu, Umedike, and the other villages. Only then can we hope to face whatever comes. Nkem looked at her, his eyes filled with determination. We'll do it together. You're not alone in this, CHIDIMMA. I'll be by your side, no matter what. CHIDIMMA smiled, feeling a warmth in her chest at his words. Nkem had been her constant support throughout the trials, and she knew she could rely on him in the battles to come. As they sat in comfortable silence, watching the river's gentle flow, CHIDIMMA's thoughts turned to the future. She knew that uniting the villages would be no easy task. The people were divided by old grudges, fears, and mistrust. But she also knew that they were stronger together than apart, and she was determined to find a way to bring them all under one banner. The next morning, CHIDIMMA called a meeting of the village leaders. The elders of Arachuku, Umudaik, and several neighboring villages gathered in the great hall, their faces serious as they awaited her words. CHIDIMMA stood before them, her heart steady. She knew that this was a pivotal moment, one that could determine the fate of all their people. Leaders of the villages, she began, her voice clear and strong, we stand at a crossroads. The king's power grows stronger by the day, and he will stop at nothing to bring all the villages under his control. But we have something he doesn't, we have the strength of our unity. If we come together, if we put aside our differences and fight as one, we can resist him. We can protect our homes, our families, and our way of life. The elders exchanged glances, some nodding in agreement, others looking uncertain. Elder Ikin, who had been a guiding figure for CHIDIMMA, spoke up. CHIDIMMA is right, he said, his voice carrying the weight of his years of wisdom. The king is a dangerous man, but he is not invincible. If we are to survive, we must stand together. The right of truth has shown us that CHIDIMMA is a leader we can trust. She has proven her strength and her loyalty to our people. Elder Chinyere, who had been skeptical of CHIDIMMA at first, also spoke in her favor. I was not sure of CHIDIMMA when she first came to us. But she has shown that she is more than worthy of our trust. I believe she can lead us in this fight. One by one, the other leaders voiced their support. It was not unanimous, there were still some who doubted, who feared the repercussions of standing against the king, but the majority were willing to follow CHIDIMMA's lead. With the leaders' support secured, CHIDIMMA knew that the next step was to prepare for the coming conflict. The villages would need to be fortified, the warriors trained, and alliances forged. It was a daunting task, but one that CHIDIMMA was ready to face. In the days that followed, the village bustled with activity. Warriors trained in the fields, crafting weapons and honing their skills. Women and children worked tirelessly to gather supplies and strengthen the village defenses. The elders met frequently, discussing strategy and planning for the days ahead. Through it all, CHIDIMMA remained at the center, guiding and encouraging her people. She visited each village, speaking with the leaders and the villagers, listening to their concerns, and reassuring them that they were not alone in this fight. Her presence brought hope to those who were afraid, and her determination inspired those who wavered. But as the preparations continued, CHIDIMMA couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. There were rumors of spies in the villages, of traitors who might seek to undermine their efforts. And there were whispers of a power greater than the king, a dark force that was said to be manipulating events from the shadows. CHIDIMMA knew that the battle ahead would be more than just a physical one. It would be a battle of wills, of hearts, and of spirits. And as the storm clouds gathered on the horizon, she steeled herself for what was to come. The calm before the storm was ending, and soon, the true test of her leadership would begin. The days following CHIDIMMA's call to unite the villages were filled with a tense energy. Word spread quickly across the land that the people were preparing to resist the king's rule. Warriors from neighboring villages arrived in Arachuku, pledging their loyalty to the cause. Each village brought something unique to the alliance: skilled fighters, expert craftsmen, and even knowledge of the terrain that would prove invaluable in the battles to come. CHIDIMMA moved through the camp, observing the preparations. She saw warriors practicing with their weapons, sharpening their swords, and refining their archery skills. The sounds of training filled the air, clashing metal, shouted commands, and the steady rhythm of drums that kept everyone in sync. Despite the serious atmosphere, there was also a sense of camaraderie among the people. Old rivalries were set aside as they focused on the greater threat. CHIDIMMA noticed warriors from different villages sharing techniques and stories, bonding over their shared purpose. It gave her hope that, together, they could stand against the king's forces. One afternoon, as CHIDIMMA was discussing strategies with the village elders, Nkem approached her with a grave expression. "CHIDIMMA," he said, lowering his voice so only she could hear, "there's something you need to know. We've received reports of strange movements in the forest. Some of our scouts have gone missing, and those who returned speak of seeing shadows, figures moving in the trees that seem to disappear when approached." CHIDIMMA frowned, her mind immediately going to the rumors she had heard about a dark force aiding the king. "Do you think it's the king's men?" she asked. Nkem shook his head. "I'm not sure. The scouts described something unnatural. I don't want to alarm anyone, but we need to be prepared for anything. The king may have more than just soldiers at his disposal." CHIDIMMA's thoughts raced as she considered the implications. If there was a supernatural element to the coming battle, they would need more than just physical strength to overcome it. She remembered the right of truth and the connection she had felt to the spirits of her ancestors. Perhaps they could help guide her now. "I need to speak with the elders," CHIDIMMA said, her voice firm. "We may need to call upon the spirits for protection and guidance. If there is something more at play here, we can't afford to face it unprepared." Nkem nodded, trusting her judgment. "I'll make sure the warriors are ready. Whatever comes, we'll face it together." CHIDIMMA gathered the village elders in the sacred grove where she had completed the rite of truth. The air was thick with anticipation as they lit incense and prepared to call upon the spirits. Elder Ikin led the ceremony, his voice rising in a chant that resonated with the ancient trees surrounding them. As the smoke from the incense curled into the air, CHIDIMMA closed her eyes and focused on the connection she had felt during the rite. She silently called out to the spirits, asking for their guidance and protection in the coming battle. For a long moment, there was nothing but silence. The elders waited, their eyes closed, their breath slow and steady. Then, CHIDIMMA felt a familiar presence, a warmth that spread through her chest and filled her with a sense of calm. She knew the spirits had heard her. In her mind's eye, she saw the same figure she had seen before, the woman who had spoken to her during the rite. The spirit's voice was soft but clear. "CHIDIMMA," the spirit said, "the path ahead is fraught with danger, but you are not alone. The king has indeed called upon dark forces to aid him, but you have the strength of your ancestors behind you. Trust in your people, and trust in yourself. The power to overcome this lies within you." CHIDIMMA nodded, her resolve strengthening. "Thank you," she whispered. "I will not let you down." The presence slowly faded, leaving CHIDIMMA with a renewed sense of purpose. She opened her eyes and saw the elders watching her, their expressions filled with expectation. "The spirits have spoken," CHIDIMMA said, her voice steady. "The king has dark forces on his side, but we are not without protection. We must strengthen our defenses, both physical and spiritual. The battle ahead will test us in ways we cannot yet imagine, but we must remain united." The elders nodded in agreement, and Elder Chinyat stepped forward. "We will prepare the village for what is to come. Our ancestors have always protected us, and they will continue to do so. But we must also be vigilant. There may be those among us who would seek to undermine our efforts." CHIDIMMA understood the warning. There was still the possibility of traitors within their ranks, those who might be swayed by fear or greed to serve the king. They would need to be cautious and keep a close watch on everyone in the village. Over the next few days, the preparations intensified. The warriors trained harder, the villagers worked tirelessly to fortify the defenses, and the elders conducted rituals to strengthen the spiritual protections around the village. CHIDIMMA moved among them, offering encouragement and ensuring that everyone was ready for the trials ahead. But even as they prepared, the sense of unease grew. There were more sightings of the strange figures in the forest, and the missing scouts were never found. CHIDIMMA could feel the tension mounting, like the calm before a storm. Then, one night, as the village lay quiet under the cover of darkness, the storm finally broke. It began with a distant rumble, like thunder rolling across the sky. The villagers stirred, their sleep disturbed by the ominous sound. CHIDIMMA was already awake, her senses alert. She could feel the shift in the air, the heaviness that signaled something terrible was about to happen. Nkem burst into her hut, his face pale with urgency. "CHIDIMMA, they are here. The king's forces are approaching from the north. And there's something else. Something unnatural." CHIDIMMA quickly gathered her things and stepped outside, where the village was already in a state of alarm. The warriors were assembling, readying their weapons, while the villagers hurried to take shelter. As CHIDIMMA looked to the north, she saw them, hundreds of soldiers, their armor gleaming in the moonlight. But it wasn't just the soldiers that sent a chill down her spine. Behind them, moving through the trees like shadows, were the figures the scouts had described. They were barely human, more like wraiths, dark, twisted forms that seemed to merge with the night itself. CHIDIMMA felt a wave of fear wash over her, but she pushed it aside. This was the battle they had been preparing for. The time had come to fight for their homes, their families, and their freedom. "Everyone, to your positions," she called out, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Remember what we've trained for. We fight for our people, for our ancestors, and for our future." The warriors let out a battle cry, rallying behind CHIDIMMA's words. As they took their positions, CHIDIMMA felt the weight of her responsibilities more acutely than ever. The lives of everyone in the village depended on her decisions, her leadership. But she also knew that she wasn't alone. The spirits of her ancestors were with her, and so were the people she had come to love and respect. As the king's forces drew closer, CHIDIMMA took her place at the front of the warriors, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and determination. This was the moment she had been preparing for. The battle for their future was about to begin. With one final glance at the sky, where the moon shone down like a silent witness, CHIDIMMA drew her sword and braced herself for the fight of her life. The night was alive with tension as the king's forces advanced on Arachuku. The moon hung high in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the battlefield. CHIDIMMA stood at the forefront of her people, her heart beating fiercely in her chest. She knew the time had come to fight, not just for herself, but for everyone she had come to love. The warriors of Arachuku, Yumedaik, and the other allied villages stood ready, their weapons gleaming in the moonlight. They formed a solid line, each person prepared to give their all to defend their home. CHIDIMMA could see the determination in their eyes, but also the fear. This was no ordinary battle, they were facing not just the king's men, but forces of darkness that few truly understood. CHIDIMMA's gaze shifted to the twisted forms moving behind the king's soldiers, dark wraiths that seemed to blend with the shadows. The stories had been true. The king had allied himself with something unnatural, something that threatened to consume them all. But CHIDIMMA felt the presence of the spirits with her, their strength flowing into her like a river of light. She knew she could not let fear control her. The people were looking to her for leadership, and she would not let them down. With a deep breath, she raised her sword high. "For Arachuku. For our ancestors. For our future." Her voice rang out, strong and clear, cutting through the night. The warriors answered with a thunderous roar, their spirits lifted by her rallying cry. The king's forces surged forward, and the battle began in earnest. The clash of swords and the cries of warriors filled the air as both sides fought with everything they had. CHIDIMMA found herself in the thick of it, her movements swift and precise as she parried blows and struck back with a strength she hadn't known she possessed. Beside her, Nkem fought valiantly, his spear a blur as he defended their line. He glanced at CHIDIMMA every so often, ensuring she was safe, but he also knew that she could hold her own. They were in this together, side by side, as they had always been. The battle raged on, but it wasn't long before CHIDIMMA realized that the wraiths were the real threat. They moved silently, slipping through the lines and sowing chaos wherever they went. The warriors who tried to engage them found their weapons passing through empty air, as if the wraiths were made of smoke. But CHIDIMMA knew these were no mere shadows. They were creatures of darkness, bound by ancient magic. And if magic had summoned them, then perhaps magic could defeat them. Remembering the right of truth, CHIDIMMA reached deep within herself, calling on the power of the spirits. She closed her eyes, blocking out the sounds of battle, and focused on the warmth she had felt in the sacred grove. Slowly, she began to chant, words that came to her not from memory, but from some deeper place within her soul. The air around her shimmered, and a soft glow began to emanate from her skin. The wraiths seemed to sense the change, turning their attention to her. But instead of fear, CHIDIMMA felt a surge of power. She opened her eyes, and they were filled with light. With a cry, she raised her sword and slashed at the nearest wraith. This time, the blade connected, cutting through the dark form with a burst of light. The wraith let out a shriek, dissolving into mist that was quickly carried away by the wind. CHIDIMMA didn't stop. She moved through the battlefield with purpose, each strike of her sword sending waves of light into the wraiths, driving them back. The warriors around her began to notice, their fear giving way to hope. They fought with renewed vigor, rallying around CHIDIMMA as she led the charge. But the battle was far from over. The king's soldiers were well trained, and they fought fiercely, refusing to give ground. CHIDIMMA's arms ached from the strain, but she couldn't afford to stop. Not when so much was at stake. Then, from the corner of her eye, CHIDIMMA saw a figure approaching, tall, imposing, and unmistakably the king himself. He wore a crown of gold, and his eyes gleamed with a mixture of fury and something darker. He moved through the battlefield with a confidence that sent a chill down CHIDIMMA's spine. The king raised a hand, and the wraiths that remained surged forward with renewed aggression. CHIDIMMA could feel the power emanating from him, a dark, twisted energy that was unlike anything she had ever encountered. "You think you can stand against me, girl?" the king's voice boomed, cold and disdainful. "You are nothing. I will crush you and take what is mine." CHIDIMMA stood her ground, refusing to be intimidated. "You're wrong," she called back, her voice steady. "You may have power, but you have no honor, no love for your people. That's why you will fail." The king sneered, his expression full of contempt. "We shall see." He raised his hand again, and the ground beneath CHIDIMMA's feet began to tremble. The earth split open, and dark tendrils of shadow emerged, reaching for her with malevolent intent. CHIDIMMA tightened her grip on her sword, but before she could strike, a figure stepped in front of her, Elder Ikin, holding a staff of ancient wood. The elder's eyes were filled with resolve, and he began to chant in a language older than the earth itself. The shadows recoiled, unable to withstand the power of the elder's words. The ground closed up, and the tendrils vanished as if they had never existed. The king's eyes narrowed in anger, but Elder Ikin continued to chant, his voice growing louder and more powerful. CHIDIMMA felt the energy building around her, a force of light that pushed back the darkness. She knew this was her moment. With a cry, she charged at the king, her sword glowing with the combined power of the spirits and the elder's magic. The king met her with a snarl, drawing his own sword. Their blades clashed, sending sparks flying. The force of the impact shook the ground, but CHIDIMMA held firm. She fought with everything she had, her movements fueled by the determination to protect her people. But the king was a formidable opponent. He matched her blow for blow, his dark power making him faster, stronger. CHIDIMMA could feel her strength waning, but she refused to give in. She knew that she had to end this, once and for all. As their swords clashed again, CHIDIMMA suddenly felt a surge of energy, stronger than anything she had felt before. It flowed into her from all around, from the earth, the air, the spirits, and the people who had placed their trust in her. With a final, desperate cry, CHIDIMMA channeled all that energy into one powerful strike. Her sword blazed with light as it cut through the king's defenses, shattering his blade and piercing his heart. The king let out a gasp, his eyes wide with shock and pain. The dark energy around him dissipated, and he fell to the ground, his body crumbling into dust. The battlefield fell silent. The wraiths dissolved into nothingness, and the king's soldiers, now leaderless, dropped their weapons in surrender. CHIDIMMA stood over the fallen king, her chest heaving with exhaustion, but also with a sense of triumph. She had done it. They had won. The warriors of Arachukwu let out a cheer, their voices rising in celebration. CHIDIMMA turned to them, a weary but grateful smile on her face. She knew that this victory was not hers alone, it belonged to all of them, to the people who had fought and bled for their freedom. But even as they celebrated, CHIDIMMA knew that this was only the beginning. There would be more challenges ahead, more battles to fight. But she also knew that as long as they stood together, they could overcome anything. As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, CHIDIMMA sheathed her sword and walked back to her people, ready to face whatever the future held. The sun rose slowly over the horizon, casting a warm, golden light over the battlefield that had, just hours before, been a place of violence and fear. Now, the land was quiet, the only sounds those of the wind whispering through the trees and the distant calls of birds welcoming the new day. CHIDIMMA stood on a small hill overlooking the village, her heart filled with a mixture of relief and uncertainty. The king was defeated, his dark forces vanquished, and the people of Arachukwu were safe for now. But CHIDIMMA knew that this victory came with new responsibilities, ones that she could not ignore. Nkem joined her, his face weary but his eyes bright with admiration. "You did it, CHIDIMMA," he said quietly. "We all did. But without you, none of this would have been possible." CHIDIMMA shook her head, humbled by his words. "We did this together, Nkem. I may have led the charge, but it was the strength and courage of our people that brought us victory." Nkem nodded, understanding her humility. "What happens now?" he asked, looking out at the village below, where the people were beginning to emerge from their homes, unsure but hopeful. CHIDIMMA sighed, the weight of the future pressing down on her shoulders. "Now, we rebuild. We heal the wounds left by this battle, and we prepare for whatever challenges may come. The king is gone, but the scars he left behind will take time to mend. We must unite the villages, strengthen our bonds, and ensure that something like this can never happen again." As the morning progressed, the village elders gathered to discuss the next steps. Elder Ikin, still recovering from the immense power he had channeled during the battle, spoke with a wisdom that came from years of experience. "We must be cautious," he said, his voice firm but kind. "The king's defeat will not go unnoticed by those who supported him. There may be others who seek to take his place, to seize power for themselves. We must be vigilant and protect what we have fought so hard to achieve." The elders agreed, and CHIDIMMA was once again reminded of the complexity of leadership. It wasn't just about winning battles, it was about guiding her people through the aftermath, ensuring that they could thrive in a world that was still filled with dangers. Over the next few weeks, the villages worked together to rebuild what had been damaged during the battle. Homes were repaired, fields replanted, and the people began to return to their daily lives. But there was a change in the air, a newfound sense of unity that had not existed before. The villages that had once been rivals were now allies, bound together by the trials they had faced and the victory they had won. CHIDIMMA spent her days helping wherever she could, working in the fields, aiding in the construction of new homes, and listening to the concerns of the villagers. She was no longer just the daughter of a foreign woman and a local man, she was a leader, someone whom the people looked up to with respect and trust. But even as peace settled over the land, CHIDIMMA couldn't shake the feeling that something was still amiss. The battle had been won, but the world was changing, and she knew that they had only seen the beginning of the challenges that lay ahead. One evening, as the sun set over the village, CHIDIMMA visited the sacred grove where she had completed the rite of truth. The trees stood tall and silent, their leaves rustling softly in the breeze. She knelt before the ancient stone altar, closing her eyes and reaching out to the spirits that had guided her through so much. "Ancestors," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "I have done what I could, but I know our journey is not over. Please, continue to guide me. Show me the path that will keep our people safe and strong." For a long moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, just as before, CHIDIMMA felt the warm presence of the spirits, a gentle reassurance that filled her with peace. In her mind, she saw a vision, a vast expanse of land, stretching far beyond the borders of Arachukwu. There were people there, people she did not recognize, but who were struggling against forces of their own. She saw a great river, winding through the land like a lifeline, and a towering mountain that seemed to touch the sky. And then she saw herself, standing at the forefront of a large group of people, leading them not into battle, but into a new era of peace and prosperity. The vision faded as quickly as it had come, leaving CHIDIMMA with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt before. She stood up, a new resolve in her heart. The spirits had shown her the way forward, and she knew what she had to do. It was not enough to protect just Arachukwu, there were others out there who needed help, who were facing challenges just as great, if not greater. CHIDIMMA returned to the village, her mind already racing with plans. She called for a meeting of the elders, sharing with them the vision she had received. They listened carefully, and though some were hesitant, they could not deny the truth of her words. "If we are to ensure the safety and prosperity of our people," CHIDIMMA concluded, "we must look beyond our borders. We must reach out to others, offer our help, and forge alliances that will strengthen us all. The world is changing, and we must change with it." The elders agreed, and preparations began for a journey that would take CHIDIMMA and a group of trusted warriors and elders far beyond the borders of their village. It would be a journey of discovery, of forging new relationships, and of spreading the strength and unity that had been born in Arachukwu. As CHIDIMMA prepared to leave, she took one last look at the village she had fought so hard to protect. The people waved her off with smiles and blessings, confident that their leader would return with even greater strength. The journey ahead was uncertain, and CHIDIMMA knew that they would face many challenges. But she also knew that they had the strength of their ancestors with them, and that as long as they remained united, they could overcome anything. With Nkem at her side and the spirits guiding her steps, CHIDIMMA set out on the next chapter of her journey, one that would shape not only her future, but the future of all the people of the land. And so, with hope in her heart and determination in her soul, CHIDIMMA led her people into the dawn of a new era. The journey was long and arduous, stretching far beyond the familiar lands of Arachukwu. CHIDIMMA, Nkem, and a group of trusted warriors and elders traveled for many days, crossing rivers, climbing hills, and making their way through dense forest. The land around them changed as they moved forward, becoming both wilder and more beautiful. At first, their journey was peaceful, marked by moments of quiet reflection and the occasional conversation with villagers they met along the way. These villagers were often surprised to see such a group traveling together, led by a young woman of such confidence and strength. Word of their purpose spread quickly, and they were welcomed with curiosity and respect. But as they ventured deeper into unfamiliar territory, CHIDIMMA began to sense an unease in the air. The people they encountered spoke of strange occurrences, crops failing, livestock disappearing, and whispers of a growing darkness that no one could explain. The further they traveled, the more frequent these stories became, until it was clear that something was deeply wrong in the land. One evening, as they set up camp by the edge of a large river, CHIDIMMA gathered her companions around the fire. The moon was high in the sky, and the air was thick with the scent of the forest. "We've heard too many stories to ignore," CHIDIMMA began, her voice low but firm. "There is something troubling these lands, something that seems to be spreading. We need to find out what it is, and if we can, we must help the people here before it's too late." Nkem nodded in agreement. "I felt it too," he said. "An unease, like a shadow lurking just out of sight. Whatever it is, it's not natural. We need to be on our guard." Elder Okoye, one of the oldest and wisest of the group, leaned forward, his face grave. "These lands are ancient, and so are the forces that reside within them. There are spirits here, older than those we know, and not all of them are benevolent. We must tread carefully, and we must be ready to face whatever comes." The group agreed, their resolve hardening. They knew that their journey was no longer just about forming alliances, it was about confronting a darkness that threatened to engulf everything they held dear. The next morning, they crossed the river and continued their journey, following the river's path as it wound through the land. The further they went, the more desolate the landscape became. Villages were abandoned, their once thriving fields now barren. The trees grew twisted and gnarled, their branches reaching out like skeletal hands. It wasn't long before they encountered the first signs of trouble. As they walked through a narrow valley, the sky darkened suddenly, as if the sun had been blotted out. The wind picked up, howling through the valley like a mournful wail. CHIDIMMA's heart raced as she felt the presence of something unnatural, something malevolent. "Stay close," she ordered, her hand resting on the hilt of her sword. The others obeyed, their eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of danger. As they moved forward, the ground beneath their feet began to tremble. The valley walls seemed to close in on them, the shadows growing thicker and more oppressive. CHIDIMMA could feel the dark energy all around them, pressing down on her like a heavy weight. Suddenly, the earth split open with a deafening crack, and a figure emerged from the darkness. It was a creature unlike anything they had ever seen, a towering figure of shadow and flame, its eyes burning with an unnatural light. The air around it shimmered with heat, and the ground beneath it turned to ash. The creature let out a roar that echoed through the valley, shaking the very ground they stood on. CHIDIMMA drew her sword, the blade glowing with the light of the spirits. She knew that this was the darkness they had been warned about, the force that was spreading through the land. "Prepare yourselves," CHIDIMMA shouted, her voice cutting through the roar of the creature. The warriors formed a defensive circle around the elders, their weapons at the ready. The creature lunged at them with terrifying speed, its claws slashing through the air. CHIDIMMA met its attack head-on, her sword clashing with the creature's fiery limbs. The impact sent a shockwave through the valley, but CHIDIMMA held her ground, refusing to be pushed back. Nkem and the other warriors joined the fight, their weapons striking at the creature from all sides. But the creature was strong, its body seemingly impervious to their attacks. Each time they struck, the creature would reform, its flames burning hotter and its shadow growing darker. Elder Okoye began to chant, his voice rising above the chaos. The words were ancient, filled with the power of the spirits, and the air around them began to hum with energy. CHIDIMMA could feel the power building, and she knew that this was their chance. "Now," she shouted, and together, they unleashed a combined attack, their weapons glowing with the light of the spirits. The creature let out a final, anguished roar as the attack struck through, its body disintegrating into a cloud of ash and smoke. The valley fell silent, the shadows retreating as the creature was vanquished. CHIDIMMA lowered her sword, her breath coming in heavy gasps. They had won, but she knew this was only the beginning. The group gathered around Elder Okoye, who was visibly drained from the effort. "That creature was only a fragment of the darkness that plagues this land," he said, his voice weary. There is something more powerful at work here, something that we must uncover and defeat. CHIDIMMA nodded, her resolve strengthening. We will find it, she said. And we will stop it, no matter what it takes. With that, they continued their journey, knowing that the road ahead would be fraught with danger. But they were ready, for they had faced the darkness before, and they would do so again. As they traveled deeper into the unknown, CHIDIMMA couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The land around them grew wilder, the air thicker with tension. But she knew that they were on the right path, and that whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. And so, with the spirits guiding their steps, CHIDIMMA and her companions pressed on, determined to uncover the truth and bring light to a land shrouded in darkness. Days passed as CHIDIMMA and her companions journeyed further into the unknown, the landscape growing more treacherous with each step. The air was heavy with tension, and the once blue sky was now a constant, oppressive gray. The land seemed to resist them, the very earth shifting beneath their feet as if trying to push them back. Despite the challenges, CHIDIMMA pressed on, her resolve unshaken. She knew that they were drawing closer to the source of the darkness that plagued the land. Each night, as they set up camp, she would meditate by the fire, reaching out to the spirits for guidance. And each night, she would receive visions, fragments of a past long forgotten, of battles fought and lost, and of an ancient power that had been sealed away. One evening, as the group made camp in a dense forest, CHIDIMMA had a vision more vivid than any before. She saw a great temple, hidden deep within the mountains, its entrance guarded by towering statues of ancient gods. Inside the temple, a dark power post, contained by ancient words that were beginning to weaken. The vision ended with the image of a great shadow, spreading across the land, consuming everything in its path. When she awoke from the vision, CHIDIMMA knew that they had found their destination. The temple was the source of the darkness, and it was there that they would find the answers they sought. The next morning, she shared her vision with the group. We must find this temple, she said, her voice firm. It's the key to everything. The darkness that plagues this land is coming from within its walls, and if we can reach it, we may be able to stop it. The others agreed, their faces grim but determined. They knew that the journey would be dangerous, but they also knew that there was no turning back. With renewed purpose, they set off towards the mountains, guided by the visions that CHIDIMMA had received. The forest grew thicker as they approached, the trees twisted and gnawed, their branches reaching out like claws. The ground beneath their feet was soft and treacherous, as if the earth itself was trying to swallow them whole. After several days of arduous travel, they finally reached the base of the mountains. The towering peaks loomed above them, shrouded in mist and shadow. The air was cold and still, the silence broken only by the occasional cry of a distant bird. As they began their ascent, the path grew narrow and steep, forcing them to move slowly and carefully. The mountains seemed to grow darker as they climbed, the mist thickening until they could barely see a few feet ahead. CHIDIMMA led the way, her senses heightened by the presence of the spirits. She could feel their energy all around her, guiding her steps and warning her of dangers ahead. Despite the cold and the exhaustion, she felt a deep sense of calm, as if the spirits were with her, protecting her. After several hours of climbing, they finally reached a plateau where the temple stood, hidden deep within the mountain. Just as in her vision, the entrance was guarded by towering statues of ancient gods, their faces stern and unforgiving. The temple itself was massive, its walls carved with intricate symbols and depictions of battles fought long ago. But even from a distance, CHIDIMMA could feel the darkness that pulsed within the temple's walls. It was a malevolent energy, ancient and powerful, and it seemed to reach out to them, trying to pull them closer. "We found it," CHIDIMMA said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is the place." The group approached the temple cautiously, their weapons at the ready. As they neared the entrance, they could see that the ancient words that had once protected the temple were beginning to fade, the symbols that had once glowed with power now dull and cracked. This place was sealed long ago, to keep something inside, Elder Okoye said, his voice filled with awe and fear. But the seals are breaking. Whatever is inside is trying to escape. CHIDIMMA nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew that they had no choice but to enter the temple and face whatever awaited them inside. The darkness that had spread across the land was coming from within these walls, and if they did not stop it, it would consume everything. With a deep breath, CHIDIMMA led the way into the temple, the others following close behind. As they crossed the threshold, the air grew colder, and the darkness seemed to close in around them. The walls were lined with ancient carvings, depicting scenes of battle and sacrifice, of gods and demons locked in eternal struggle. At the center of the temple, they found a massive chamber, its ceiling lost in shadow. In the center of the chamber was an altar, and on it lay a dark, pulsating orb, its surface swirling with shadow and flame. The orb was the source of the darkness, its power filling the room with a sense of dread. As they approached the altar, the ground beneath them began to tremble, and the shadows on the walls seemed to come to life, swirling around them like a dark storm. The orb pulsed with power, and a deep, rumbling voice filled the chamber, speaking in a language that none of them could understand. CHIDIMMA knew that they were in the presence of something ancient and powerful, something that had been sealed away for a reason. But she also knew that they could not turn back now. The darkness had to be stopped, and it was up to them to do it. "Prepare yourself," she said, her voice steady despite the fear that gripped her heart. "This is our only chance. We must destroy the orb, no matter what it takes." The group formed a circle around the altar, their weapons glowing with the light of the spirits. Elder Okoye began to chant, his voice rising above the rumble of the dark energy that filled the chamber. The others joined in, their voices blending together as they called upon the spirits for strength. The orb began to pulse faster, its light growing brighter as it fought against the power of their combined will. The shadows in the chamber swirled around them, trying to break their circle, but CHIDIMMA and her companions held firm, their determination unwavering. With a final, deafening roar, the orb exploded in a burst of light and darkness, the force of the blast sending them all to the ground. For a moment, there was nothing but silence, the air thick with the scent of smoke and ash. When CHIDIMMA opened her eyes, she saw that the chamber was filled with a soft, golden light. The shadows had vanished, and the oppressive darkness that had filled the temple was gone. The orb was no more, its power shattered by their combined efforts. Slowly, they got to their feet, their bodies aching from the effort. The temple, once a place of darkness and fear, was now filled with a sense of peace and calm. The ancient carvings on the walls seemed to glow with new life, the symbols of the gods now shining with a gentle light. "We did it," Nkem said, his voice filled with wonder. "The darkness is gone." CHIDIMMA nodded, her heart filled with relief. But she knew that their journey was not over. The darkness that had spread across the land was only a symptom of a greater problem, and there were still many questions left unanswered. As they left the temple and made their way back down the mountain, CHIDIMMA felt a sense of hope for the first time in a long while. They had faced the darkness and won, and now they could begin the work of healing the land. But even as they descended the mountain, CHIDIMMA couldn't shake the feeling that there were still challenges ahead. The world was changing, and she knew that they would need to be ready for whatever came next. As they reached the base of the mountain and began their journey back to Arachuku, CHIDIMMA looked out at the horizon, her heart filled with determination. The battle was won, but the war was far from over. As CHIDIMMA and her companions made their way back to Arachuku, the journey felt different. The air was lighter, and the oppressive gloom that had once hung over the land was gone. Villages they passed were beginning to show signs of recovery, with crops sprouting and people emerging from their homes to greet the travelers with smiles and words of gratitude. Despite the visible changes, Chidimma remained cautious. She knew that while they had destroyed the source of the darkness in the temple, the after effects could still linger, and there were still many mysteries that needed unraveling. The group reached Arachuku just as the sun was setting, painting the sky with shades of gold and crimson. The people of the kingdom gathered at the gates, their faces filled with hope and curiosity as they watched the return of their leaders. News of their victory had spread quickly, and the atmosphere was electric with anticipation. Chidimma's father, Chief Okpara, stood at the front of the crowd, his eyes filled with pride and relief as he saw his daughter leading the group. He stepped forward to embrace her, the tension of the past weeks melting away in that moment. "You have done more than I could have ever imagined," Chief Okpara said, his voice thick with emotion. "You have brought hope back to our people." Chidimma smiled, but her mind was still focused on the challenges ahead. "The darkness may be gone for now, but we need to stay vigilant," she said. "There are still many questions left unanswered, and we need to be ready for whatever comes next." The elders gathered to discuss the journey, and Chidimma recounted everything that had happened, from the visions she had received to the battle within the temple. As they listened, the elders nodded in agreement, their faces serious. "There is much we do not understand," Elder Okoye said, his voice grave. "The orb was a powerful force, but it was only a manifestation of something greater. We need to learn more about these ancient powers and how they came to be." Chief Okpara agreed, his brow furrowed in thought. "We will need to send word to other kingdoms and seek their counsel," he said. "This is not just a threat to Arachuku, but to all of our people." As the elders discussed their next steps, Chidimma felt a sense of restlessness. She knew that her journey was far from over, and that there was still much she needed to do. The spirits had guided her this far, but she knew that there were still more secrets to uncover, more challenges to face. That night, as she lay in her bed, Chidimma couldn't sleep. Her mind was filled with questions about the temple, the orb, and the visions that had led her to the temple in the first place. She felt a pull deep within her, a sense that there was something she was meant to do, something that would require her to go beyond the borders of Arachuku. The next morning, she sought out Nkem. He was by the river, sharpening his blade, his expression focused and serious. He looked up as she approached, a smile playing on his lips. "I had a feeling you'd come," he said. "You're not one to sit still for long." Chidimma smiled in return, though her thoughts were heavy. "There's something more out there, Nkem. I can feel it. The orb was just the beginning. I need to understand what's happening, to find the truth." Nkem nodded, his eyes serious. "I'll go with you, wherever this journey takes us. We've come this far together, and I'm not about to stop now." Chidimma was grateful for his support, but she knew that this journey would be different. It wasn't just about defeating a physical threat, it was about uncovering the mysteries of the past, about understanding the forces that had shaped their world. The next few days were spent in preparation. Chidimma met with the elders, explaining her plan to leave Arachuku in search of answers. Though they were reluctant to see her go, they understood the importance of her quest and offered their blessings. Before she left, Chidimma visited her mother's grave. She knelt before the simple stone marker, her heart heavy with emotion. "Mother," she whispered, "I wish you were here to guide me. I know that I have to do this, but I'm afraid. I don't know what I'll find out there." As she spoke, a gentle breeze rustled the leaves around her, and she felt a warmth in her heart, as if her mother's spirit was with her, offering comfort and strength. Chidimma closed her eyes, letting the feeling wash over her, and she knew that she was on the right path. With Nkem by her side and the blessings of her people, Chidimma set out from Arachuku once more, this time on a journey that would take her far beyond the borders of her homeland. She didn't know what she would find, but she knew that she had to follow the call of the spirits, to uncover the truth and protect her people from whatever darkness lay ahead. As they traveled, the landscape around them began to change, becoming more foreign and unfamiliar. They passed through lush forests and wide plains, crossed rivers and climbed mountains. Along the way, they encountered new people and new cultures, each with their own stories and legends. CHIDIMMA listened carefully to the tales they were told, searching for any clues that might lead her to the answers she sought. She learned of ancient gods and forgotten wars, of powerful artifacts and hidden temples. Each story added a new piece to the puzzle, bringing her closer to understanding the forces at work in her world. But the further they traveled, the more CHIDIMMA began to sense a growing danger. The visions that had once guided her became more fragmented and chaotic, filled with images of fire and destruction. She felt the presence of a new darkness, one that was even more powerful and insidious than the one they had faced before. Despite the growing sense of unease, CHIDIMMA pressed on, determined to find the answers she needed. She knew that the journey would be long and difficult, but she also knew that she was not alone. The spirits were with her, and so were her companions. As they neared the border of a distant kingdom, CHIDIMMA felt a sudden surge of power, as if the very air around her was charged with energy. She knew that they were close to something important, something that would change everything. With a deep breath, CHIDIMMA led her companions forward, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The journey was far from over, but she was prepared to see it through to the end, no matter what the cost. And so, with the spirits guiding their steps, CHIDIMMA and her companions ventured into the unknown, their hearts filled with determination and hope. The darkness had not yet been vanquished, but they would not rest until they had brought light to every corner of the world.